me ask you a question. Do you like high damage numbers? Do you like one-shotting all the most annoying bosses in the entire game? Well then do I have a build for you. Let me introduce you to Zariel's Hellblade. This is a build dealing so absurdly high damage that not a single boss can withstand a single turn against it. Without using any mods, this build, even in Act 2, can deal 260 or more damage in a singular hit. And in Act 3, that goes well over 400 damage. This build is beyond broken. And in this video, I'm gonna show you every single thing you need to know to make this build yourself, including items, gear, consumables, levels, and most importantly, how exactly to play this build. I hope you enjoy. Starting, of course, with our race, which is going to be Zariel Tiefling, mostly for cosplay reasons, but also because it gets some free smite casts down the line. Our class is of course Paladin, and more specifically Oath of Vengeance Paladin. Then we get 0 into strength, because we get the elixirs for this. 40 dexterity just for +2 initiative. The armor class isn't useful to us because we're gonna use heavy armor. Constitution on 16 just for more HP and better concentration saves. And then the rest into charisma, because charisma, through 2 different perks I'm gonna explain later, is directly tied to our damage output, so having this modifier high is very important. You start with 17, but then through Anti-Ethel Spoon and then later the Char Mirror, you're gonna get all the way up to 20, which is a +5 modifier, so very nice to have this. Then, for our actual levels, we're gonna go for the dueling fighting style. And the only spell we care about is Searing Smite. Now, this build at its core is very simple. All you do is cast Searing Smite, and then use the Divine Smite reaction. Our goal is to get as many high level spell slots as possible, so we can upcast this, and then also upcast the reaction. Searing Smite gets 1d6 fire damage on every upcast, but since our target is always vulnerable, that's 2d6 fire damage. But since we're also guaranteed to crit if you use Luck of the Far Realms or any paralysis effect, we get 4d6 fire damage for each upcast, which is an insane amount considering how high the spell slot levels we get are in the end. So that's the biggest chunk of damage we're going to be dealing in those large hits you saw in the intro. Now at level 3 we get a free cast of this, which is actually a level 2 cast, even though it says level 1 right here. It's the damage of a level 2 cast. And I just mentioned how many d6s our damage is gonna be consisting of, and that's why it's very important to have Savage Attacker. Savage Attacker will re-roll every individual damage die of all those d6s. So having this will raise our damage average insanely high, because every single d6 will be rolled twice and the highest result will be taken. And not only does Searing Smite roll d6s, but Divine Smite rolls d8s, and our main weapon, which is the Flame Blade, will also roll d6s. So all those different dice will be rolled individually and twice. So this is a huge damage upgrade and a mandatory feat. Level 5 gives us a few things, most importantly extra attack, but also level 2 spell slots, so higher smites. Then we get a free cast of Branding Smite, and also 8 and protection from poison. 8 obviously is just more HP, and protection from poison can be useful, but since Paladin has divine health anyway, this isn't as useful always. Next, at level 6, we multi-class into Sorcerer. Now Sorcerer gives us a few good things, but the main reason why we choose it is, for one, all the spell slots it gives. It's a full caster, so the spell slot progression is much faster. And it also will give us some very nice features down the line, which I'm gonna go into in a second. Our subclass of choice is of course Draconic Bloodline, and our Draconic Ancestor is anyone with fire. I like this one because it always has Burning Hands prepared, but all the fire ones are fair game. And this is just cosmetic, so choose whatever you like here. We also do get Shield from Sorcerer, which is just an awesome spell to have. It's plus 5 armor class for free and can, or not for free I guess, but for basically nothing. And it really can save your life, especially on honor mode or solo honor mode. Always nice to have. And these two are useful because with some slight tweaks, this build can easily become a caster as well. So, and I'm gonna also mention a few items to pick up along the way in the item section, so you can easily swap between high damage nuke and just a normal sorcerer if you want to. But these aren't the main focus of the build, so I'm not gonna go too in depth on them. We get our first level 2 spell, which is Scorching Ray, just to stay on theme. And also more meta magic. Quicken spell, funnily enough, works with smites. Usually the special smites require an action and a bonus action, but using Quicken spell they require 2 bonus actions, which can be useful if you have any sources of bonus actions, such as the Helmet of Grid or the Pyro Quickness set, which I'm gonna go into in the item section, obviously. Now, we already do have Savage Attacker for damage dice reroll, but you can never have enough. Elemental Adept Fire does, for one, make it much easier to deal with resistant targets, but it also makes it so we can't roll any one on a fire damage die, which means all of our damage dice turned from a 1d6 to essentially a range from 2 to 6. So no more ones, meaning our damage average is way higher, even more so than with just Savage Attacker. I also get Fireball here, but any non-concentration spell is useful here. I just choose it for cosplay. Make sure you don't choose concentration spells, because the main weakness of this build is that it can't really have any concentration spells active, because Searing Smite is a concentration spell and will just override whatever you're concentrating on. So make sure you have spells that do not require concentration, so you don't mess everything up. Then at level 12 we get our final spell slot, which is a level 5 spell slot, and since Sorcerer can just create more spell slots using other resources, you can actually sacrifice lower level spell slots to be able to cast multiple Searing Smites in one turn. So just this Sorcerer feature alone allows you to really dish out insane amounts of damage. Even if you have multiple high HP targets, you can just one-shot all of them in one turn. It's fantastic. Since a level 5 Searing Smite, just as an example, will deal 5d6 extra damage. That's the baseline. On a crit, that's 10d6 extra damage. And then on a vulnerable target, that's 20d6 extra damage. And that's all gonna be affected by Savage Attacker and Elemental Adept, so all those d6s are very likely to roll at least a 4 or 5 or 6. So it's a huge chunk of damage just from this one level 5 spell slot. Combine that with a level 4 Divine Smite reaction and you have the recipe for absolute nuclear disaster. I told you, this build is insane. And this is just the surface of it. And then of course you also get a level 4 spell. As per usual, I go for the fire variant. But Greater Invis is also nice, and just any of these that you maybe may like, you can just go for them. But Wall of Fire is also a great spell. Now before we go into the items, one thing Genius Me forgot to mention is that at level 6 Draconic Sorcerer, or at level 11 if we choose our main leveling path, we get this feature, which just allows us to add our Charisma modifier to our fire damage on spells. And since Searing Smite is a spell that is considered eligible for this feature, we get plus 5 damage on all of our Searing Smites just for free. And the plus 5 comes, as I said earlier, from the 20 Charisma we get from the 17 we start with, and then plus 2 from the Mirror, and plus 1 from Anti-Ethel's Boon. You can get plus 3 in total from the Mirror, but that's RNG based, and I do not want to have save scumming in my build guide. So if you want the safe route, just go for Anti-Ethel's Boon plus the plus 2 from the Mirror. Just thought I'd mention this because this feature is the main reason we're choosing Draconic subclass in the first place. But now, let's head to the items. Alright, as per usual, I have sorted all of these items depending on what act you find them in, so it's easy for you to follow on your own playthrough and collect them as you go. Starting with the Act 1 items, we have the level 2 Flame Blade. Now yes, this is the glitched version of it, that is permanent, using the hireling glitch by just having them cast the spell, then dismissing them, and then simply resummoning them to gain this version of it. The difference between this one and the spell version is that this one doesn't scale with your spellcasting modifier for damage anymore, and instead uses your strength modifier. Which is good for us, because we can just use Hill Giant and then later Cloud Giant elixirs to increase our strength modifier all the way up to +8, adding a huge chunk of extra damage and also better attack rolls. We use the Adamantine Shield, of course, just for better armor class and good defensive bonuses. Same goes for the Splint Armor. Then we also get Korga's Amulet for the start, just for extra damage. This is always the best early game option. As well as the Blast Ring and the Fire Infusion Ring, which just infuses your weapon with a 1d4 of any element that you cast a spell with. And since we cast a lot of fire spells, and Searing Smite is also a fire spell, this just infuses your weapon all the time. Now the good thing is, even though Flame Blade cannot actually be dipped in any surface or oil, this ring and this amulet still work on it, luckily, so you still get the bonuses from them. But if you try to use any consumable oil on the Flame Blade, it would not work. Which is one downside of using it, but there are enough upsides to make up for that. Next, we have the Diadem of Arcane Synergy, which adds your spellcasting ability modifier to your damage, essentially the exact same perk as the one I just showed you, but this one only triggers when you inflict a condition, but it's also kinda bugged, so it basically triggers no matter what you do. So you can treat this as a permanent buff, essentially. For our gloves, we choose the Gloves of Power. We will quickly replace them, but for the early parts of Act 1, these are nice to have. Then for our boots, we have two main options. Both depend on your concentration. This one just gives you extra temporary hit points, and this one makes it so you can't be pushed around. It's just entirely subjective what you prefer. I use these ones for better HP, but these ones are just as good. And then lastly, you have the Pearl of Power for a free level 3 spell slot, Restoration, so just nice to have. And this one, as per usual, competes with this one for what you prefer. This is better for survivability, and this is better for damage. Just normal stuff. On any build, these two are great. Lastly, the two hand crossbows. Now these are actually directly tied to the way we make targets vulnerable to fire damage. So I'm not gonna go explain what they do right now. Instead, I'm gonna have an entirely separate section where I just explain that one procedure, because it's a pretty important part of this build, so I think it deserves its own separate section. Then we proceed into Act 2, where, of course, at level 7, since Flame Blade only upcasts every 2 spell levels, we get the level 4 version of it. Every higher version deals 1d6 extra damage, and it also gets a cool visual overhaul, which is nice as well. We also get the Drake Throat Glaive, which the Draconic Elemental Weapon buff adds a 1d4 damage to our Flame Blade, and also +1 damage and attack roll, just a free buff. I currently have it on this one, as you can see, which is the last Flame Blade, and it's just a fantastic buff. And also one of the few buffs that also works on the Flame Blade. As I mentioned earlier, using oils on it does not work. We also get a replacement for our old hand crossbows, which are just the Never Misser and Hellfire hand crossbow. These are mostly just for higher hit chance. We also get the Flawed Helder's gloves for an extra 1d4 fire damage on our Flame Blade attacks. And also a few ring upgrades, most importantly the Shadow Cloaked ring for another 1d4 fire damage. You can also use the Color's Glow ring, because it actually does way more than just +2 damage, because we have multiple damage instances in our damage hits, so this will add like roughly +6 damage each hit. But I'd still argue this one is better, because it adds fire damage, and we have better bonuses for fire damage. And lastly, we have the Executioner ring, which just gives another source of a guaranteed crit if you've already used your Luck of the Far Realms, Or if you need one that doesn't require a reaction, this one is fantastic. Lastly, we also have the Surgeon's Amulet. This again leans into the guaranteed crit, meaning if you use either this one or Luck of the Far Realms for a crit, you can then apply this effect for paralysis, which just guarantees crits in the subsequent rounds. But your damage at this point is already so high that I've never encountered any fight where I needed this for more hits. I just one-shot everything that could be paralyzed. Lastly, you of course have your cloak for more AC. And you can also replace your shield. I like this one just because it gives me a higher initiative. But this one is also nice if you go more into the spellcasting route, because it gives extra bonuses for spells. You also get a few choices for armor replacement, but I do really value this perk very highly, that I can't be crit by anyone. This is more of a solo honor mode thing, so if you're not that scared of dying, because you might do it in a party or not even on honor mode, that's fine. You can just swap on these. These are both better if you don't care about this perk. This one is better for just in general keeping your concentration or defense, but this one is more of a evil themed chess piece, which is why I also kept it in, because it would be better for the cosplay. Also, we of course have a few buff items. For one, the Shade Clinger armor. This works by just equipping it, getting the buff, and then unequipping it and keeping the buff. It's also a bug, but if you want to use it, you can. And this one to restore any level spell slot. Same thing as this one, just on a higher level. But that's already it for the Act 2 items. And then lastly, the Act 3 items. We get first our Better Flame Blade. This is the final version of it, dealing in total 5d6 damage, plus all the extra bonuses. And at this point, you might notice, it doesn't show the dueling damage anymore, and it also doesn't show this damage. But don't worry, that's just a display glitch. It stays there. If you hit someone and then look in the chat at the damage calculation, all of these bonuses are still calculated. It's just how it shows here, that's different. You might also think that going to the House of Hope and just grabbing the upgrade for these gloves is the better option. But that is not true. Even though these are obviously better, there is a better option, which are the Crater Flash gloves. These work a bit odd, and I'm going to try to explain it here. They add 1d6 force damage, which sounds bad, but they add it to your Flame Blade hit, they add it to the extra damage of your Searing Smite, and they add it to the extra damage of the Divine Smite. So these proc 3 times in a single hit. And now, that would be 3d6 force damage, right? Which is nice, but not that great either. But what if I told you it's not just 3d6? For one, every single damage dice gets doubled on a crit. So it's 6d6. But we also pick up the Dollar Armorous gear, which allows us to add 14 damage total from just these two to all of our critical hits. So every single Crater Flash proc will get an extra 14 damage, resulting in 2d6 plus 14 for each of the 3 procs. So more on average 60 damage on each crit extra just from the gloves. These are fantastic. Always use these, even though these might look better. Lastly, we also have the Pyrocritna set. Now, equipping this loses us some damage. This is better for damage just because of this perk, but what it does is it allows us to get an extra bonus action when we cast Searing Smite. And the problem with these smites is always that you use your action and bonus action, so even if you have extra attack, you can't cast another one because you don't have any more bonus actions. But this head is made for this issue. It just gives you a free bonus action, allowing you to cast Searing Smite twice in one turn, without having to go for Thief for the extra bonus action, or using the Hem of Grit and lowering your HP. If you want to use multiple smites per turn, this is your helmet, but if you go for the one shot, I would always put on this one. Now lastly, you also have these 2 items. As I mentioned earlier, there is a spellcasting side to this build, even though I did not explore it that much, just because the high damage nuke is just too much fun to play. But you can just as as much, just equip the Splaymite gloves and then the Head of Fire Acuity for that high spell damage. Especially a high casted Scorching Ray will deal also a huge chunk of damage. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the items. Of course, there are some niche items that are used at some points that I did not mention because they're not as important. So if you saw any items that I used on my playthroughs that I did not use here, don't worry, those are probably not as important. That's why I didn't mention them. Okay, now it is time to explain to you just how to make targets vulnerable to fire damage, because I've talked about it a lot in the previous segments, and I think it's time to explain to you pretty simply how to do it. Now, the core element of this strategy is Arsonist Oil. How this works is you apply it to a target that is resistant to fire, and you can only apply it to targets that are resistant. If the target is not resistant, this effect won't apply. So you need some source of resistance on the target. However, if the oil is applied, all it really does on the surface is remove the resistance, resulting in damage neutrality, so neither resistance nor vulnerability. But we don't want that. We want the target to be vulnerable. So how do we get it vulnerable? We have to remove the resistance while the Arsonist Oil is still in effect. Because the Arsonist Oil essentially just drags the resistance score down by 1. Meaning if the score is +1 from the resistance, it will go to 0. But if the resistance goes away, and the Arsonist Oil effect is still there, the score will go to -1, which is essentially vulnerability. So all we need to do is, after we apply the oil, the resistance has to go away somehow. Now there are two main strategies for this. The first one is to apply resistance through the wet effect. Wet can be easily created through water bottles, and I'm going to use Astarion here as an example. We just throw this at him, and he becomes wet for 3 turns. Now the Arsonist Oil effect only lasts for 2 turns. So we have to wait until, at the top you see, the damage ticks down, and it's only 1 turn left. As you can see, right here. Now he's only 1 turn wet, and we've just coated our crossbows in Arsonist Oil. So when this 1 turn is left over, and that's why I like to use hand crossbows, because they give you the freedom to decide whether you want to use a bonus action or one part of your extra attack for the application of the Arsonist Oil. When the 1 turn is left, we just apply it. And now, as you can see, he is Arsonist Oiled. Now, he is not vulnerable yet, because the wet turn is still in effect. But as soon as we exit turn-based mode, you can see that the Arsonist Oil turn is the only thing remaining, resulting in 1 turn of vulnerability. So that's one way to do it, using wet. However, you can also use this way, which is a bit more expensive because you have to use elixirs, but it's not as precise in the timing, so it might be easier for you if you're not as experienced with the UI or the turn system in this game. So you do this, you still apply this, and now he is still Arsonist Oiled, and we throw another elixir to apply a different effect, removing his resistance to fire, and now we even have 2 turns of fire vulnerability, even though for the 1 turn we don't have as many actions left, because we have to use 1 to throw the poison elixir. So this is the other way to do it. It's a bit more pricey because you have to use 2 elixirs, but it's easier to time, and especially against targets that are immune to it, this is the only way to do it. But honestly, on any normal run, I'd recommend using water bottles. It's not that hard to time, and it's just much simpler. But if you go for the maximum amount of damage, you get 2 turns from this, so it's in theory better. I think this pretty much covers everything you need to know about this strat. It's pretty simple, but I want to make sure you understand it because it's a core feature of this build. Lastly, I used hand crossbows for this, but as you saw earlier, in Act 3 we choose the Dolor Armorous shortbow, essentially forcing us to either apply it using a normal range attack, or apply it using your offhand dagger. Now you might be asking, why not just apply it with the Flame Blade? Well, because the flame blade can't be coated, so this just isn't an option. So you have to either apply it with your offhand dagger or with an attack from your bow. And I'd recommend using your bow because you can actually shoot arrows of darkness, applying both the oil and also guaranteeing that this ring will take effect, because it gives you extra damage against obscured enemies. So if you want the best strategy, I'd recommend just applying it with an arrow of darkness. And lastly, we have a bunch of consumables that are outside of this setup, but are still very useful. First of all, extra actions from Terrazzo and Haste, as per usual, just like Invis for surprise rounds and Fly for more mobility. But of course, if you are up against hostile enemies and still want to do the setup, I can recommend Greater Invisibility, just to throw this first potion and then you can engage with the Arrow of Darkness coated in Arsonist Oil. Very useful to have for those scenarios, so having a few scrolls of this at hand is always very nice. They are also pretty cheap to buy in stores, so you should never run out of them. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, this bit is extremely simple. All you really need is this setup, and then the gear I told you plus the levels, and then upcast the shit out of your smites, and just deal those massive chunks of damage and get pure dopamine from it. This bit is so much fun to play. Again, if you want to see more action of this, and me one-shotting everything, go check out my other videos on it. But for now, that's pretty much it for this build guide. I hope you learned something, and I hope you use this build on your own playthrough and have just as much fun with it as I did. If you found this helpful, consider liking and subscribing. I do this all the time, and it's so much fun for me to see people engage with my builds and just find this helpful. So yeah. And until the next time, this is goodbye.